Good evening. So we're nearing the end of the journey. Tonight, this week, we had the story of the man born blind. Next week, it'll be the raising of Lazarus. And then we'll be prepared for Good Friday. So in the story of the man born blind, Jesus boldly claims, "I am the light of the world." What does that mean? Well, it means that Jesus, the man who walked the earth 2,000 years ago, was also present when the world was created. The very first thing that God did when he created the universe was to say, "Let there be light." When God willed that order should be brought out of the chaos, his first priority was to banish darkness, to banish sin from his creation. What is the light of the world that banishes this darkness? Well, we know it is Jesus Christ himself. The story of the man born blind is meant to remind all of us that we are born blind in darkness through original sin, which darkens our intellect and weakens our will. It is why we struggle to see the deepest truths that God has revealed to us and why it is so difficult to avoid our tendency towards sin. It also reminds us that many refuse to see the light, refuse to embrace the truth. Like the blind man's neighbors who chose to remain in their ignorance. They said, "Isn't this the one who used to sit and beg?" Some said it is, but others said, "No, he just looks like him." They represent all of us who are uninterested in the truth, who don't care or desire to devote any time or effort to discovering what the truth is. Or his parents who are afraid to take a risk. "He is of age, he can speak for himself," they said, because they were afraid of the Jews. They represent those among us who know the truth, but fear the internal and external consequences that may result if they boldly stand and proclaim the truth. Or the Pharisees, the educated, the religious leaders of their day who can't make up their collective mind and who refuse to believe. They said, and it says, "And there was division among them. We know this man is a sinner." They represent those in our culture who are so in love with their own opinion and believe science and reason are the be-all and end-all of human existence. They will ignore the facts if it might require them to reconsider their position. This journey of discipleship that we are on is a path to let go of the lies that separate us from God. It is the way to lead others into letting go of whatever fears or lies are preventing them from doing the same. Tonight, we want to focus on the stages of growing into a mature faith. Like the man born blind models for us in this exchange with Jesus, because it is only a mature faith that will allow us to follow Jesus to the very end. The first step is trust and obedience. At no time does Jesus promise a miracle to the man born blind. In fact, what he does might be considered ridiculing or demeaning him. He spits on the ground and makes clay, mud, and he smears it on the blind man's face. And then he says, "Go wash your face." With what would have been no small effort, the blind man makes his way to the pool as he was instructed to do. He trusts and he obeys. And his reward is beyond his wildest dreams. For the first time in his life, he can truly see. It was the decision by the man born blind to obey Jesus that led to the miracle of his sight being restored. If he didn't obey, if he didn't trust Jesus and do as he was instructed, the miracle never would have occurred. But more importantly, in his observance, it is his observance that allows us to realize and him to realize the truth of who Jesus is and then dedicate his life to him. I'd like to talk briefly to reinforce this centrality of obedience in discovering the will of God for our lives. I think to do that we can turn to the call of the very first apostles. If we want to call ourselves apostles, disciples of the Lord, we can look at the very first ones for this lesson. Peter, James, and John knelt in the water, intent on the task of rinsing the grime from the Galilean Sea off their nets. The night had been long and fruitless. They had not a single fish to show for their efforts. Suddenly, someone climbs into Peter's boat, and without permission, and asks him to put out a little from the shore. Now, I think it would be normal for Peter to just turn around and say, "What are you doing? Get out of my boat." But surprisingly, Peter stops what he is doing, climbs back into his boat, and nudges it away from the shore. And then he listened as Jesus taught the multitude on the bank. Jesus finishes his message and turns once again to Peter. His request this time is astounding. He says, "Put out into the deep water and lower your nets for a catch." It is a well-known fact that in the Sea of Galilee, fishermen caught fish at night in the shallow water, not in full daylight in deep water. So Peter objects. "Master, we have worked hard all night and have caught nothing." Peter is faced with a second choice. But notice he now calls Jesus Master, Rabbi, noting that whatever Jesus taught the crowd on the shore has impacted Peter as well. So Peter can obey Jesus and launch out, or he could follow his senses and his need for rest and decline Jesus' request. Initially, Peter responded to Jesus' command like you and I might have done, with logic. "Master, we've worked hard all night and have caught nothing." I can sense Peter's thoughts behind these words. "Jesus, really? You are a great preacher, but how about we leave the fishing decisions to me?" What Jesus has just asked Peter to do is contrary to all of his instincts, all of his experience as a fisherman. Now, Scripture doesn't tell us whether Peter scanned the scene and looked to his buddies for some help. It just tells us one thing. He obeyed the Lord and stated, "Master, I will do as you say." And he let down the nets. Now I can imagine the silence that fell on those who were on the shore as they watched Peter release the anchor, raise his sails, and set his rudder for the deep water. We might ask ourselves, what motivated him to do this? Is it something that I can experience in my life? Well, I believe it is. But we must trust God, like Peter and the blind man. We must respond to his commands with obedience. The phrase in this passage that grabs me every time I read it is Peter's statement, "At your command, I will." Peter knew every reason, and there were many good ones, why he should not obey Jesus. But having been given a direct command, Peter turned from his logic, his fatigue, and decided to respond to the Word of God. Peter's decision to launch out was purposed obedience. It was the result of a man who had unmistakably heard Christ's command and calculated that God's power was greater than his doubts. Peter's decision and the resulting miracle show us what a single act of obedience to God can do. It can change the course of our entire life. It surely did Peter's. It surely did the man born blind. It is no different for you and me. A single act of obedience can change the course of our entire life. When Peter chose to place his faith in the powerful Word of God, his life was never the same again. You and I can experience this same miraculous power. We serve the same Jesus who spoke to Peter and the blind man 2,000 years ago. But before anything great can be accomplished in our life as disciples of Christ, we must make the decision to launch out at his command. Like Peter, our response will either invite God's blessing into our life or inhibit it. My obedience today prepares me for my obedience tomorrow and the next day and the next month and the next year. If we want to walk in step with Jesus, if we want to hear his voice, then we must learn how to be obedient. The Christian life requires obedience. The truth is, if our faith does not grow to the point that obedience to the will of God becomes second nature to us, our lives are going to continue to be outlined by defeat, by failure, by disappointment, by suffering, by one wrong decision after another. Obedience is the true test of our love for Christ, and it is the secret to discovering God's will for our lives. Peter's story illustrates for us how God chooses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. So why is it we find it so hard to believe that God may be calling us to do something extraordinary? We're just like Peter and the blind man. We're imperfect, we're unworthy, we're busy with other things. The reality is this: God is calling each and every one of us right here, right now, to in some way, shape, or form follow him and lead others in the process. The truth is, we are all destined to change the history of the world and by the countless lives that we are going to be graced to interact with in our time on this earth. There are different roles to be played in God's work of salvation. Not all are called to be priests or deacons or religious, but we're all called. We all have a part to play. Many of us, sadly, would rather stay where it is safe. It is comfortable. It is non-confrontational. It is predictable, rather than answer God's call. But being a Christian is not about getting into heaven by the skin of our teeth after living a life of cautious mediocrity. It is about a mission that leads to glory, but only through perilous battles. We can choose to play it safe if we want, but the thoughts of who we might have become, what lives we might have impacted, may cause us many regrets as our time on this earth draws to an end. I don't know about you, but sometimes I fall into the trap of getting comfortable with where my faith life is. I put God into a safe little box and begin to do what Dr. Charles Stanley calls settling down in the valley. You know, we live in a really nice valley. We have all the creature comforts that anybody could desire. We have the opportunity to worship in a beautiful church that is air-conditioned and heated. We have a good life. It is a nice valley that we live in. God created this nice valley for us to live in. But He wants to remind us time and time again that He did not create us to settle down in the valley. He created us to climb the mountain. And while there are times when we need to settle down and refresh, the time to climb the mountain never stops. The real decision that we have to make tonight is, will we surrender to God? Will we make His dreams our dreams? Or will we spend our whole lives living a faith life of cautious mediocrity? God isn't looking for, the world is not in need of any more lukewarm Christians. God wants you and I to go all in, to hold nothing back. He wants us to let go of the things and the attitudes that are keeping us from all He created us to be. The reason people are not convinced of the Christian faith anymore, the reason our churches are emptying and our children are turning away from the faith, the reason our culture is as lost as it is that as Christians, we oftentimes don't look any different than non-Christians. It's as simple as that. If we want the world to take Christianity seriously, if we want the world to understand the only path to truth and salvation comes through Jesus Christ, then we must take it more seriously ourselves. In the things we do, in the way we live our lives. You know, going to Mass each week, reading the Bible every day, praying the rosary each night is not enough. It is a wonderful discipline in building our relationship with the Lord so that we might hear His voice. But the essential task of growing in the Christian life is letting go of the things of this world that so often can keep us from hearing and responding to God's call. God's call to follow Him is a radical, all-encompassing claim on our lives. It forces us to answer the question, to whom do you belong? To whom do you give your first love and loyalty? It means that all we are and all we have belongs to God. When people see us, they don't need to see a saint, but they need to see a sinner who is set on sainthood. We shouldn't have to tell people we're Christians. They should be able to see it, feel it, whenever they are around us. If they can't, then we need to look in the mirror and challenge ourselves to live a more compelling Christian life. It's the old saying, if all of a sudden in this country, Christians were begun to put on trial, and that may be coming, would there be enough evidence to convict you of being a Catholic, of being a Christian? The final lesson that the man born blind offers us tonight is to always be open to discovery, to new ways of living our faith, to not just get comfortable with God in His safe little box, with our rosaries and our Mass attendance and all of those good things, good and holy things. But let's always be open to when does God want us to get out of the box a little? When something wonderful happens to us, we may not be sure if it's because of God. We may not be sure what to do in response to the wonderful thing that happened. How we're to do whatever it is we feel like we're being called to do. But we should feel compelled to learn more, to try to figure out what this is all about. What does it mean for me? What is God asking of me? That should be our disposition. The dialogue with the Pharisees shows the man born blind slowly learning more about the miracle that has happened to him and the man who is responsible for that miracle. They say, "How were your eyes opened?" He said, "The man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes." "What do you have to say about him since he opened your eyes?" "He is a prophet." "What did he do to you?" "I told you already, and you did not listen. Why, do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples as well?" "We do not know where this man is from." That is what is so amazing to me, a blind sinner. That you do not know where he is from, yet he opened my eyes. If this man were not from God, he would not be able to do anything. So the man born blind in that short dialogue with the Pharisees goes from describing Jesus as a man who smeared mud on his face to a prophet who sent him to the pool of Siloam, to declaring himself a disciple of Jesus, to stating he is obviously from God, whether you can see it or not. The final step in this process of discovery is discipleship, making a conscious decision to follow Jesus as an obedient disciple and to reorder our lives accordingly. Jesus says to the man born blind, "You have seen him, and the one you're speaking with is he." He said, "I do believe, Lord," and he worshiped him. He reordered his life. The challenge for us oftentimes is to do the same, to clear out the clutter, to look past what's comfortable and normal and see where God is calling us. To worship means that all we are and all we have belongs to God. Today, especially, we have too many amusements and comforts in our lives. We are often being consumed by idle pursuits. The Kansas City Chiefs occupied every free moment I had for the last 3 or 4 months. Really? Are they going to help me get to heaven? Do they care whether I root for them or not? If they win or lose, does it bring any gain or loss to me? Why am I so invested in the Kansas City Chiefs? Would that time not have been better spent in my relationship, in my discipleship? It's the challenge we all face. We all have our loves, our things that we love to do, our things that we love to have. The challenge is, do they get in the way sometimes of our relationship? Because we are here, as we know, for one purpose and one purpose only: to know, to love, and to serve the Lord, and to spend all of eternity with him in heaven. As I said, I think the reason people are not convinced of the Christian faith anymore is that Christians don't look or act any different than non-Christians. It's hard to see who's a Christian and who's not when you walk around Walmart, isn't it? It shouldn't be hard. There should be a noticeable difference. And the people that aren't Christians should be looking at you and saying, "I don't know what she has, but I think I want some of that." If we want the world and our family and friends to take Christianity more seriously, we must make some radical changes in the way we live our lives. Here's a simple one that we're not going to talk about the signal and the damage it does tonight. That might be a talk for a different day. But if you decided to give up your phone for Lent, there's a powerful sacrifice. That's much harder than giving up chocolate. And you said that meant anyone who entered your home had to leave their phone in a basket, because we don't have phones in this house right now. What would that say to your grandchildren? Well, that would say your you're pretty serious about the choice to follow Jesus, you're making a sacrifice, and you're asking them to participate when they're with you. Those are the kind of things that may not seem to have anything to do with God, but have everything to do with leading others. We lead by example. They look at us and they say, I don't know what she's got. I don't know what he's doing, but I think I like it. You know, remember the first thing that the disciples said to the man born blind, or about the man born blind when they encountered him? They said to Jesus, whose sin was it, his or his parents, that made him blind? They're not showing compassion. They're not showing a desire. They know Jesus can heal. They've been walking with him for 3 years. Rather than say, Rabbi, should we do something for this man, don't you think? They're like, well, why? Who sinned? Who made him like this? Who did that? It's sometimes, I think, how we do the same, don't we? We pass by the people in the street with their hands out. And we have all kinds of reasons in our mind why we don't hand them any money, why we don't do anything. It's the same thing Jesus challenges us all with. These are little tests. Remember, the money is God's, not ours. So if we hand it off, we're not giving away something of ours, we're giving away something of God. It feels like ours. We've taken possession of it. But God owns it all. When we look at the less fortunate in this way, we show that we have lost sight of what God has blessed us with and what he expects from us in response to those blessings. Our blessings are not a privilege to do with as we please. They are a responsibility to be exercised prudently. They are the criteria by which we will be judged. Were we generous givers in this life? That's a question we're all going to have to answer. We won't be able to dodge it either. When we stand before God, there's no, well, we're not even trying to lie at that point because it won't do us any good. Christ tells us that we must let go of the passing things of this world in order to more fully pursue the eternal life. How often does the lure of earthly riches and pleasures take our focus off the true purpose of our existence? Materialism, in our culture most specifically, endeavors to deprive us of the foundation of for strength and happiness in our life: faith in God and a focus on our eternal destiny. We cannot allow ourselves to be absorbed in our work or in the distractions of the world, so much so that we regard our relationship with God as secondary in our lives. The problem isn't that we don't love God. The problem is sometimes we don't love God as much as we love ourselves. We live at a frantic pace in this culture, with little time for what is truly important. If we wish to change this, we must slow down and embrace simplicity. How many of you are retired? You know, it's almost a joke, right? People retire and they say, I've never been so busy in my life. Really? I'm in the same boat. And sometimes that's how I feel. I've never been so busy in my life. Well, isn't it time to slow down? If we're going to slow down at all, I'm thinking now's the time. We sure need to model a different pace for the people around us. You know, maybe, as I said, a good choice for our cell phone would be just use it for a phone. Nothing else. Because you know why? When you ask people, why do you have to have a cell phone? Well, in case of an emergency, right? How many of you have had one of those emergencies? Well, occasionally, minor emergency, that's nice to have a phone. But the truth is, we don't use it as a phone. Whatever the show is, the Family Feud, uses for a cell phone. Making a phone call was 7th on the list. I thought that's what it was for. Apparently not. How much time do we spend? All of us. It's not unique to any one of us. Maybe we need to start driving the speed limit. How many of you drive over the speed limit? I'm not talking about 40 miles an hour over. I'm talking about 5 miles over. We all do, don't we? The state has decided this is the safe speed to drive on this road. But we know better, don't we? We can go past that. Why? Well, because we're always in a hurry. If we're late, we're driving 10, 15 miles over the limit. We see it every day on the highway. I mean, you're going the speed limit, it's like you got to get out of the way. Why do we live this way? Drive the speed limit. Say a prayer, a rosary while you're driving for all those people who are speeding past you. Because where they got to go is so important. Maybe we need to spend a little more time learning the teachings of the church, attending things like this. As I always say, whoever I'm speaking to, you're the cream of the crop. You're here. So when I say all this, it isn't so much to disparage the crowd in front of me or disparage anybody. It's just to challenge us all to take another step. This is what I know with all my heart. No matter whether you are Mother Teresa bumping up against the gates of heaven, or you are a desperate sinner peering into the depths of hell, all God is asking from you, one more step. Step away from the cliff. Step towards the gate. Take that first one. And then he'll want another one. And then he'll want another one. And pretty soon, all those steps lead to Mother Teresa standing next to the gates. There's no sinners in heaven, only saints. Our heart has to be set on becoming a saint, or we won't get in. It's only saints. Here's another one. Maybe I need to get rid of the television. That would be radical. We got rid of the television in our house 20 years ago. Unfortunately, in that 20 years that have ensued, the television showed up right here in the palm of your hand. Used to be, if you got rid of the television, you didn't have television. Not the case anymore. The devil found a different way to get the message into your home. That's the challenge, because, folks, there's a lot of good entertainment on the television, but there's a lot of awful entertainment. I always say, the man I was raised by, and this was back at the dawn of television when it was still black and white, and there were 3 channels and the UHF thing, you know. If what was on the TV today would have been on the TV then, he would have taken that TV out into the street and busted it with a sledgehammer, rather than let his family be exposed to that garbage. Before he died a couple of years ago, he had a 55-inch high-definition flat screen in his living room for his grandchildren to enjoy. What happened to that man? Well, slowly, relentlessly, he gave in. It's the frog in the water. You just turn up the heat a little, and boil you to death while you just live there and seem happy. Maybe we need to declutter our homes. This is a good one. If you're talking about a simple life, and you know, there's been a bit of a movement in our country toward a simple life, toward tiny houses. I don't know what the movement's all about. I don't know really what's driving it. But there's no doubt if you move into a tiny house, you can't have as much stuff. You got nowhere to put it. I mean, think about this country. One of the biggest businesses in our country is storage facilities. We have got so much crap, we can't even keep it in our house, which is huge by the world standards. And if you're retired, get rid of it. Your kids don't want it. They're going to throw it away when you're dead. Get rid of it now. Save them the trouble. I know this, sometimes I sound crazy, but it's those kind of decisions made for God that change our destiny. Don't do it because you're just crazy and like to do spring cleaning, do it because you want to simplify your life so that you have more time to devote to God. Then it will make a difference. Bottom line is the list is endless. We all have our favorite distractions. Lent is meant to help us let go of some of our favorite distractions for a while and find some time to be with God. But it needs to be, the 40 days teach us how to let go of it for good. And again, not because it is evil, but because it is not the greatest good for us. The challenge is to listen to Christ and take seriously his call to stop working so hard for things that do not matter, that perish, and focus more of our time and energy on things that endure for eternity. One thing I know is what, as I said in my homily Sunday, here we are 2,000 years after Pilate stood face to face with the truth. And the choice for us is still the same. We can agree with the world that there is no real truth. You have your truth, and I have my truth, and you have your truth, and just we all get along. Okay, well, that's a lie from the pit of hell. There is truth, and it is unquestionably the method, the plan by which we are to live this life. Not everybody agrees, but that doesn't change the fact. We've bought into this, well, let's just let everybody have their own truth and we'll just get along. Sadly, because of that, souls are perishing every day. Souls meant to live for all of eternity in heaven are not living for all of eternity in heaven because we've just bought into the lies. In our modern culture, as I said Sunday, addictions to drugs, alcohol, pornography, and gambling are at epidemic levels. I would be surprised that there is a single person in here that does not have somebody in their family that is addicted to one of these things. You may not know it because they hide it, but they are addicted. In our modern culture, abuses of human sexuality are encouraged. Political power has become the norm. Abusing their political power, it's just how we do things now. We don't go to Washington to serve the people. We go to Washington to get power and then abuse it. In our modern culture, our conversations are laced with profanity and hatred. You just read responses on social media. They're not pleasant. Just walk around Walmart and listen to the way people talk to each other, the way cuss words have just become adjectives in our way of speaking. Things that we all know when we were young, if you had said that, you would get your mouth washed out with soap. Now, mom is saying it to their children. What happened? And of course, in our modern culture, gun violence and crime are getting worse and worse every day. And people say, well, you just hear about it more. No, it's not that you hear about it. It's that it's occurring more. If you're unsure about your next step, what God is calling you to do, pick any one of these issues. Do something about it. I guarantee you he'll say, there you go. That's what I was looking for. When we hear the exchange between the man born blind and the Pharisees, we see a good lesson about the courage that is often required if we are going to stand up and proclaim the truth as it's been revealed to us by God. As I said, the man born blind is speaking in front of the most powerful audience you could speak in front of. He's speaking in front of the Senate. You're going to speak in front of the Senate next week. What are you going to say? I had the opportunity almost to pray, to give the prayer at the mayor's prayer breakfast. I had prayer prepared that meant to challenge leaders in our community. But that's what we need to do. Say the truth. challenge the people in power. But the man born blind stood in front of them, and he just spoke the truth as God has revealed it. Won't make you popular, but somebody will hear it. Somebody will listen. Somebody will have that ember that's barely alive deep in their heart begin to show a little flame again. That's why we do it. And that somebody may be your son or your daughter, your brother, your sister, your cousin or your nephew. Those are the people that God specifically puts in our lives and says, this is one of the people you're supposed to be leading. If you're a parent, as most of us probably are or were, still are, we know that we're going to be held accountable for how we raise those children. And we may say, well, I did everything I could. I sent them to the Catholic school. I brought them to church every Sunday. And that'll be a good answer. You did all you could do. God will say, okay. But as we all know, you don't get to stop being a parent when they're finally out of your house and they're making their own decisions. You're still the parent. You're still called to set the example. You're still called to challenge them when they're stepping outside the rules. It's hard. I got older kids. My oldest is 39. They don't live their lives the way I think they should be living their lives. But I can tell you, my oldest son, I took him out to lunch. I was taking him out to lunch once a month, and at one of those lunches, we're sitting there, and he said, Dad, why do we always have to have this conversation? I said, because I love you, Jay. If we don't have this conversation, it means I don't love you anymore. Is that what you want? No. Okay. Then we'll have this conversation. He understands. I'm not trying to tell him how to live his life. I'm trying to propose to him the way to live a life, both by how I model it, but what I say in response. Today we are called, like the man born blind, to be courageous in living and sharing our faith. As we live our lives in response to God's call, we will often be in conflict with the culture around us. Our answer is not to compromise our beliefs just so we can get along with everybody. But it is also not to aggressively fight with those who would deny the truth. All we can do is plant seeds. You can't argue somebody into the truth. They've got to come to it on their own. If we must suffer to stand our ground, then we suffer willingly. We draw closer to our God in the process. Because Jesus' life and death, as we know, revealed to us that it is not conflict that overcame the Romans. It was not conflict that changed the world. It was self-sacrificing love. It was giving his life for the world. That's what changed the world. There's 2 billion of us today. They started with 12, maybe a couple hundred followers. They didn't have any money. They didn't have any churches. They didn't have any schools. And here we are, 2,000 years later, there's 2 billion of us. Now, we're in a time of decline. But we have the Gospels. We have the churches. We have the money. We have the people. 2 billion of us. God will hold us accountable for what we did with all those wonderful resources that the 12 didn't have. Our answer, as I said, is to just proclaim the truth. If we do that, we can stand before God with our head held high. All right, I look forward to seeing you next week. Our final time, I think Father says I'm preaching Good Friday and leading stations, so we'll kind of try to put a bow on it that day for everybody, even those who weren't here the whole time. So thank you for being here.